This is Jeremiah Piper, and you're listening to Science from the Source. In today's episode, we talk carbohydrates. Specifically, we discuss the concept of training high and sleeping low, as I speak with early career researcher Lauriane Marquet, who is a research fellow at Marseille University, France. In this interview, Lauriane speaks about her path from PhD to academia, and then we talk about her 2016 paper, Enhanced Endurance Performance by Periodization of Carbohydrate Intake, Sleep Low Strategy, which was published in Medicine and Science in Sport and Exercise. Lauriane joins us today from Marseille, France, via Zencastr. Lauriane, thanks for coming on the show.
Hi.
So, we're going to be talking with you today, and you're an early career researcher at Marseille University. And what we're going to be discussing today is we're going to talk a bit about your thesis, and that was the effect of carbohydrate availability on performance. We're going to talk a little bit about your paper that was published in Medicine, Science, and Sport and Exercise, titled Enhanced Endurance Performance by Periodization of Carbohydrate Intake, the Sleep Low Strategy. But before we do any of that, you're going to be the very first early career researcher that we've had on this show. And so I want to speak to you a bit about your career to this point. And so if you wouldn't mind just speaking about how maybe you made the journey from undergraduate university to now you're working as a researcher in a university. So if you could maybe talk about that for a bit, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so thank you for the invitation, Jeremiah. So yeah, I ended my PhD thesis 1 year and a half. It's a PhD I did with the University of Nice in south of France and the Institute of Sports in Paris, so working with elite athletes. And so at the end of my PhD, I had the opportunity to join the Marseille University in a growing department of the sports department of the university, aiming at working with the elite athletes. So we had to have research activities and also sports scientist activities like giving advice to elite French athletes. So I have the chance to work with people I already know during my PhD thesis, so it was quite easy to join my new team. So yeah, it was not so complicated, but I feel very lucky that I know that for all the PhD students, it's not that case. But sometimes you have the opportunity you have to take.
Yes, and so you worked a bit in high performance sport with the French Institute of Sport, and you're saying now with your job, now you're doing very much the same work?
Yes. So during the PhD thesis, we had a mission that it's like a sports scientist activity. So the PhD thesis in the lab was done in the French National Institute of Sport, so where elite athletes are training. So the laboratory have to help coaches and athletes to perform better. And so PhD students were also had the mission, not just the researchers, so also the PhD students had to also have this kind of mission. So it was very, very interesting.
And were there any types of sports that you were connected to? So at the Australian Institute of Sport, many times the PhD students are connected to one or two different sports. Were you overseeing many sports, or were there single sports you were overseeing?
As studying in sports nutrition, I work mostly in weight category sports, so mostly with the judo team, and it's still the case now. I'm still working with the French team, even if I change. I left the French National Institute of Sports, but also we were not so many working on nutrition in the French National Institute of Sports. And so we made, or we were five, so we were all working in educational leaflet or I don't know, cooking class in the French Institute of Sport. So So we were working with a lot of sports.
Okay, you said you work primarily with sports that are concerned with weight, and for people who don't understand that idea around sport, can you just explain how what impact weight has in a sport like judo?
Yeah, so the judo athletes need to make the weight, as they said, for the competition. So they don't have to be 100 grams over their weight categories. So that means that all during the year they need to be close to their weight at competition. So, and it's not that easy for them. So we accompany them to be not much more than 3 or 4 kilos over their weight categories. But it's not that easy, and so we accompany them for the making weight. So for the lose of weight, 2-3 weeks or 1 week before the competition, and also during nutritional strategy during competition. So after the weigh in, athletes need to be rehydrated because they mostly lose several grams or kilos with water loss, so they need to be rehydrated. So we accompany them to have the best strategy for their health and their performance also, and so some nutritional strategy during the day of competition and recovery after the competition. And also we try to work on the nutritional habits during all the year of training to avoid injuries, to have a balanced diet, so to promote recovery and performance. And mostly on weight sports, they just think about the weight in and not the nutrition to be performant during all the year. So it's a point we have to improve.
So that means you must be fairly busy. I come from a cycling background, and that's also a sport where athletes tend to obsess about their weight. But in the off season, they might go off and eat a bunch and gain a bunch of weight back. But it sounds like you were kind of responsible for these judo athletes all year round, and so it must have taken a lot of your time.
Yes, 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 and a lot. You have to repeat mostly like simple message, but it's like an nutritional education. So you have to repeat the message all year long, and but it's very interesting because you try to change habits from sports who have very old habits and sometimes bad habits.
So, before we actually get into your PhD and then, of course, the article, um, having come from an elite sport background, I think a lot of students who come through their undergraduate degrees and then go into their PhDs, that's a dream career path is to work with athletes, to work at an institute of sport. So, what could you give any advice to a student who's listening to this who thinks that that's the avenue they want to go?
Yeah, so first, I think I was very lucky to have this change to work with elite athletes, and most of PhD theses are not working with elite athletes. For me, I was very interesting in sports in general, so I know I wanted to work in sports. So I made first an internship in the French National Institute of Sports in another lab, working in statistic of performance. And then I meet my future PhD director, the Dr. Auswirth, and so we discuss about the what I wanted to do, and I had the opportunity to that this PhD thesis subject came. So I think if you want to work with elite athletes or other subjects or other institution you want to work in, I think you need to be close to this organization, and you have to show that you are very, very motivated. I think PhD director prefer a highly motivated student more than very, very good student, like with good results during during school, but not very motivated. So I think if you know what you want to do, it will be easier for you to convince your future PhD director to work with you.
That's a really good point. We tell our students a very similar story that if you want to work in elite sport, you should already be working in elite sport. So you should be volunteering your time, trying to be around clubs, trying to be helpful where possible. And then, of course, usually those circumstances lead you to meet a PhD supervisor, and it usually goes from there.
Yeah, and I think working with elite athletes are very demanding. Like you have to be very available for elite athletes and not maybe doing like commonly working hours. So most of the time competition are during weekends. Athletes are available after the training afternoon session, so maybe late during the day. So you have to be very available. And so if you are not willing to have this kind of day, I think you will not working with elite athlete, because you need to be very available. You need to to discuss with them, or you need to have empathy and not working for you, but working for the athletes first.
So you worked in elite sport. You just made a comment that it's quite demanding. It can be very difficult. Um, Knowing that, what were some of the highlights of your PhD? So, what were some of the things that you really then enjoyed in terms of the PhD experience? And then, if you can maybe talk about how that led on to your current position.
Yes, what I like during PhD is like you are not a student anymore. It's like you were already working. It's just that you are learning our specific job, like researcher, and it's not a day like you are going to the university, sat in a bench and heard some lessons. So you are very proactive in your day, and the PhD. I think the PhD thesis is a success because you want it to be a success, that if it's your work, so nobody will do it at your place or at your own. So you have to do it by yourself, and so you learn working methodology, like working good and fast and with scientific openness. So that's why I like the most during the thesis, and I like also to be in the laboratory with other subjects. So you get a scientific openness, which I think is very important in your career of researcher. Mostly, I don't know the topic, but in sports nutrition, nutrition doesn't go alone. So you need to know recovery, training. Sometimes psychology. So if you can work with other researchers of other topics, discuss with them of their research, it was very, very interesting. And for me, it was very balance between the research activity and the real field or real experience with the elite athletes. Like the research activity were directly went directly into the coaches and athletes, and you see that what you are looking or you are studying during your research activity are very useful to athletes and coaches. And so I like to hear about the needs of the athletes and coaches, and then doing research on this topic. But I think researchers need to be in advance of what the athletes and coaches want. So maybe we can make suggestions to the athletes and coaches to improve or to have new strategy of training of or nutrition to help them improve performance and be the best. That's why they are training.
So that makes a nice transition into the next part of the interview. We're going to talk a bit about your overall thesis, and as a nutritionist, and you just kind of made a comment that you like the applied side of research, and nutrition is an incredibly applied portion of sports science. And again, you can't have exercise physiology or biomechanics or sport performance without adequate nutrition. So maybe if we could just talk for the next 10 or 15 minutes about your thesis in general. And so you were looking at the impact of carbohydrate on performance. And so can you maybe just walk us through your mindset, why you chose that area of research, what impact your research had, and what you were trying to answer with your overall thesis?
Yeah, so the overall focus of my PhD was the influence of carbohydrate availability on performance, and mostly on enduro sports like cycling or triathlon. And we start on this topic because so we know that on optimal quantitative and qualitative nutritional intakes play a fundamental role in high level performance in order to support training load, prevent injury, and to improve performance. But now, for few years, nutritional intake are not limited to cover just the nutritional needs induced by training, but the training program and nutritional strategy can act together in the development of training adaptation and leading to the improvement of performance that by nutrition you can create a metabolic stress with a low availability of nutrients. So in my case, in carbohydrates, in precise moment of training program that lead to biochemical pathways and induce more expression of certain type of gene, increase the activity of enzymes that are endurance training adaptation. The nutritional intake of the nutritional recommendation of carbohydrate intakes for endurance sport advice for an intake before to ensure an increase of muscle glycogen, an intake during to maintain a constant elevated glycemia, and an intake immediately after to replenish glycogen stores. But most studies show that glucose is not only an energetic substrate, but that glycogen or muscle glycogen act as a modulating factor of training adaptation. So most studies were investigated like train low as a low carbohydrate availability strategies, but they look on the biochemical adaptation, but no study reported a real improvement of performance. So that's what the point of my thesis. It was more to look on the performance effect of this strategy more than the biochemical or metabolic changes.
Yeah, I found that very interesting that you were saying that you can have nutritional strategies that can have far-reaching consequences in terms of outcomes, and so you can turn on or off cell signaling, and that's a bit of some of the discussion from your paper that we're going to discuss in a bit. But I don't think a lot of athletes or coaches really recognize the impact that nutrition has, and that they may look at only the training portion as the most important part of the athlete. And so, are you saying that nutrition is as important as the training itself?
I wouldn't say that is as much important as training. I think the basis is training, but you can modulate the effect of training with nutrition.
So would you say then that nutrition is a supplement with training, and it can provide both an optimization of training, but in itself can also provide additional stressors?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, Seeing as you did most of your research in carbohydrates, what is your take on this new trend of the low carb athlete?
In my PhD, we didn't actually study a low carb strategy. It's more a periodized carbohydrate training program. And most of my study were done in collaboration with Professor Louise Burke and Professor John Ole. So it's not a low carb training program. It's a periodized carbohydrate program. That means that in precise moment of training, the carbohydrate availability is low, but the carbohydrate intake over the day, it's like normal. So you don't decrease your glycogen stores because you have a normal carbohydrate intake. I'm a little bit dubitative on the low carb strategy because we know that glucose is the main substrate energy at high intensity and high power. So when you need to finish an event with a sprint or with very high power or high intensity, if you don't have carbohydrate or glucose available, it will be very difficult to sprint or to produce more power. So I think there is a different part. So it's for sure we eat too much carbohydrate in our diet today, and we need to focus more on good fat. But maybe you have a moment of your training program when you need to be low carb, very low carb, periodized carbohydrate, and high carbohydrate availability. So I don't know if you see the Sky nutritional recommendation and mostly carbohydrate intake for Chris Froome, not during Tour de France but during Vuelta, and is not at all low carbohydrate availability during race day. He is very high carbohydrate availability because he needs to have this kind of energetic substrate during the race.
And the reason I brought that up is that in your paper, and we're going to discuss that in a second, you made some comments about why you chose to let athletes do their high intensity exercise after being fed carbohydrates. And so, do you think that you can get the same adaptations from something like high intensity interval training in a carb depleted state, or do you think you need to be you need to have well developed glycogen reserves or carbohydrate reserves before you undertake that type of training?
I think you need to be carbohydrate repleted when you are training, like in HIIT training session. And some paper reported that when you have a low carbohydrate availability, the power decrease if it's in like a cycling training session. So you won't have a high quality training session, or you will not have the quality you wanted during this training session. And it's a paper who showed this. It was paper of twice training a day, and there was a first training in the morning, then no carbohydrate during the day, and then last training session in the late afternoon, and it was a HIIT training session, and they showed that the power output decreased during the late afternoon training session because they didn't have they were not fully replenished and glycogen store. So I think if you want to combine well training and nutritional strategy, HIIT training session must be done with a high level or glycogen store.
One final question before we get to the paper, around this idea of doing high intensity interval training with high carbohydrate stores. Do you think there's a place, though, for training in a carbohydrate depleted state to increase someone's psychological acceptance of that feeling? So anybody who's exercised in a really carbohydrate depleted state knows how they feel. It feels pretty bad. Towards the end of a race, you might be carbohydrate depleted. Do you think there is still a place then to do some of that type of training under those conditions?
Yeah, for sure. I think there is two adaptation. It's like a central adaptation, like in perception of effort, and metabolic adaptation to train with low carbohydrate availability. It's that we show in another paper during my PhD thesis. It's that. So in the study we had two groups of athletes, and we had them to to fill in a rate perceived exertion scale during their training during the week. And all the group who were training with low carbohydrate availability rate higher perception of effort during this session doing as fasted. So and during the performance test, they show a less difficult effort than the control group. So I think when you are training with low carbohydrate availability, training seems harder. So when you have a high carbohydrate availability, it will be much more easy for you. So you have like, as I said, central adaptation. Yes.
So let's move on to the paper itself. And so, again, the title of your paper, Enhanced Endurance Performance by Periodization of Carbohydrate Intake, Sleep Low Strategy. So you're looking at having people eat carbohydrate, doing high intensity exercise, then not eating carbohydrate overnight, and then exercising again in a low carbohydrate state. Can you give us an idea of why you did the study in the first place, and then kind of walk us through how you did it, what you found, and what you think the findings mean?
So as I said, the nutritional strategy have two goals. So promoting nutritional environment to have optimal fooding availability, and two, promoting training adaptation. So in that context, a previous study with train low strategy, so low glycogen level or low exogenous carbohydrate availability, showed upregulation of selected markers of endurance training adaptation. But none of the study investigated the chronic effect of the strategy on athletic performance, or none with a training program which is close to the real training program of elite athletes. So we wanted to implement this strategy in a real life training program that mimic the habits of elite athletes. So we studied two groups of 10 triathletes during 3 weeks. So both groups had the same training program. So that means 6 training sessions over 4 days. So as you said, 3 HIIT training sessions known to deplete glycogen store, so done in the late afternoon, and 3 morning sessions performed as fasted for the sleep low group, so the group with low carbohydrate availability. So both groups had the same carbohydrate intake. So as I said, it was not a low carbohydrate strategy, but more periodized carbohydrate strategy. So the carbohydrate intake for both groups was set at 6 grams per kilogram per day, but periodized differently over the day. So the sleep low group had no carbohydrate intake between the end of the afternoon training session and the end of the morning session. So they performed this session as fasted. And so they had no carbohydrate at dinner, overnight, and during the steady state morning training session. So specific training session was performed under low carbohydrate availability. So during recovery of the depleted training session and during the low intensity session. And so what we find, the most remarkable result is that all the subjects of the group which were training with low carbohydrate availability increased their performance on 10 kilometer time trial. So they have to do 10 kilometers running time trial around an athletic track. And so they improved their performance around 3%. And none of the athletes of the control group had to improve their performance. And we noticed also a decrease of body mass for the sleep low group, and notably a loss of fat mass. And so we keep the fat-free mass constant with an ingestion of protein supplement in recovery of the HIIT training session, so without carbohydrate, but in order to maintain fat-free mass, which is very important to optimize the body composition. And so it was the first study to show an athletic performance improvement training under a sleep low training strategy. So we call it sleep low because you have a low carbohydrate availability during the night, so during the sleep. And we think it is easier for athletes to have low carbohydrate availability when they are sleeping than during the day. And it allows for more prolonged low carbohydrate availability periods. So, and as we show that it has an improvement of performance, we think it's a strategy that would be useful for coaches to implement with their athletes. Because if you say coaches that it increase fat oxidation or increase the activity of this kind of enzyme, he will not interested. He will be not interested in. But if you show him that you have an improvement of performance, so he will maybe he will use it with the athletes. So I think that this result reinforced the growing evidence that carbohydrate availability is a potent mediator in the adaptive response to endurance training, and that periodizing it with the training program to include a session with high fuel to promote a high quality session, and then have a low carbohydrate availability recovery. Recovery is when training adaptation are mostly organized. So when recovery is done with low carbohydrate availability, it will enhance metabolic adaptation, and it can lead to superior training outcome.
So a few questions. The 6 grams per kilogram per day, what is that something that you would only do for an athlete, or if I was just a general guy doing a bit of exercise, what would my normal carbohydrate intake per day? What would you recommend for that?
We set at 6 grams per kilogram per day because it's like a normal carbohydrate availability for endurance sport. So it could be much more, around 8 or even 12 grams per kilogram per day. But we had only 6 training sessions over the week. So over 4 days, and the last 3 days of the week they could train one training session per day. So it was not a 2 training session per day during 7 weeks. So we set at 6 grams per kilogram per day because we guess it will compound the need of the training program. And during this study we will not working with elite athletes but more trained athletes, so in lower level than elite athletes, because it was too hard to implement this strategy with elite athletes.
When you talked about performance enhancement, you said that in the sleep low group, everybody got better. In the control group, nobody got better. And I was just wondering if you think that change in performance was due to the ability to sustain a higher power output as a percentage of their maximum, or whether you think, and I think in the paper you allude to the fact that doing your high intensity sessions in a carbohydrate fed state is quite important for the adaptations to occur. So, what do you think it was that allowed those individuals to have better performance?
I think for both group, high intensity training session were done with high carbohydrate availability. So I don't think the difference is made during the high intensity training session, but more during recovery, because in the control group they had immediately a carbohydrate intake after the high intensity training session, but the sleeper group had no carbohydrate intake during the recovery period overnight. So I think the difference is made more here. And so during this study, we did not measure the pacing strategy, or we could do that because we had the data. But in another study with cycling, they have to do, so after only 1 week of sleep low strategy, they have to do a 20-kilometer time trial on their own bikes. And so we recorded the pacing strategy. And in the sleep low group, they had they developed more power output in the late 5 kilometer of the 20-kilometer time trial than the control group. So they could perform better in the late kilometer and the end of the performance test.
And so in the paper itself, you talk a bit about changes in efficiency. And to me, it sounds maybe that the performance enhancement could have been impact of just being more efficient in movement. So producing or using less energy to produce the same amount of output. Can you talk a bit about that measurement and how you went about collecting it and what it might mean?
Yeah, so they had a different performance test. So they had a sub-maximal performance test during which we measure gas exchange and to have the carbohydrate and fat oxidation. So they just have to do a 4 intensity, so sub-maximal. So we didn't measure economy during the performance test because we want to be closer of the competition condition. So the 10 kilometer time trial, they had just to run on the track and do the 10 kilometer time trial, but we did not measure any other measure at the time. So and during the submaximal test, so we measure a decrease of carbohydrate oxidation for the sleeper group, but not an increase of fat oxidation. So I think maybe more study will be have to be done to know what is going on the substrate oxidation after 3 weeks of training like this, and it's one of my project at Marseille University is to work on this part, but more difficult in France to make like biopsy or blood sample we could be, but so we wanted to focus more on performance, and so we didn't measure enough metabolic markers.
And that makes sense. I mean, you made a comment, anyways, that this is a very applied based project, and that coaches really may not care that you found better efficiency or reduced fat mass. What they really care about is whether people went faster or not. So, with these findings, after you look at all this information, is this something you said you would recommend that athletes might do this during the training program? Would this be something that you would do at certain times of a training program, or do you think this is something that you could use at various times of the year? Are there points in the season or in a competition that you would think this would be better?
Yeah, I think there is some moment of the training plan you can do this. But what we don't know for the moment is how long the adaptation will last. So how long before a competition you can program this kind of nutritional strategy. So when you go back to a more traditional training program, so with high carbohydrate availability, which is commonly done before competition, will this endurance training adaptation with more fat oxidation will last I don't know, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It's something we don't know for the moment. So, and it will be very useful to have this information to program this strategy before training competition. So I think you don't need to do this right before a competition because it strategy which develop certain amount of fatigue. So I think you need to have your taper before your competition, but maybe in during a training camp right before, maybe 1 month before your training competition. But it's something we don't know for the moment. So I would do this like that, but I'm not very sure.
I want to end on two final questions. So, the first question is, and you've just sort of summed up a bit of your findings, but if you could sum up your entire study in 2 to 3 sentences, what would that be?
I would say that first, so fuel for the work required. So when the aim of the training program is to improve performance, so train with high carbohydrate availability, so in order to support the high training load. And when training aim is developing training adaptation, so periodize your carbohydrate intake can be an efficient strategy.
Very good. To me, it's quite interesting. I mean, again, I come from a cycling background, and not only the performance aspect, but the loss of fat mass in your sleep low group was quite interesting. And I think that many athletes would take great note of that, especially those trying to maintain or lose weight coming into competition. So finally, if someone listens to this, and like I said, I think a lot of athletes who hear this program might be quite interested in your outcomes and your future studies, of course, in terms of how long these adaptations last and whether or not, and what are the actual mechanisms of action. If someone wanted to contact you to speak to you about your research, or maybe there's a student who wants to do a PhD and would like to work in your lab, how would someone get in contact with you?
Yeah, it would be lovely to continue this research with students. So students can contact me at on my Twitter account at LA Marquet, so LAMARQUIT.
Great. Well, Lauriane, I really want to thank you for taking the time today and speaking with me about your projects, about your PhD, your paper, as well as just talking a bit about your journey from PhD student to now full-time academic. And I think that anybody who listens to this show will be quite interested in your outcomes. Again, like I said, I think people will be very interested to see future outcomes coming from your lab. So again, just thank you very much for making the time to speak with me, and I hope you enjoyed the process.
Yeah, and thank you for the invitation. So it was very good experience. So thank you very much.
That concludes another episode of Science from the Source. If you enjoyed the podcast, please help support the show by telling your family and friends. If you would like to contact me to discuss the podcast or any of the content, please feel free to contact me via Twitter at Jeremiah Pfeiffer or by email at sciencefromthesource, that's all one word, @gmail.com.